Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at basic device configuration. We'll be discussing device names, password guidelines, configuring passwords, encrypting passwords, and finally banner messages. This episode is part of my series on Introduction to Networks. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. Now, this configuration deals with routers and switches. The examples we use here necessarily doesn't matter if it's a switch or a router, but these all basic configurations can apply to a router or a switch. First thing is setting a domain. First thing is setting a host name. Once again, we are in privileged exec mode. We go in and we type configure terminal, or config T for short, and that takes us into global configuration mode. Now, to change the name of your device, to change the name of your host, is simply host name. Type in host name, put a space in there. Once again, that space signifies that's the end of the command, and then it's an option or an argument you put in. And what do you want it to be called? So in this example, we type in config terminal, hit enter, takes us into global configuration mode, type in host name space, and then sw-floor-1. Hit enter, and notice the name of the device is changed right away. The next line down, it's changed. You're still in global configuration mode, configs in those parentheses, but it changes your name. Now, a couple things to know about device names. You can start with a space. It is case sensitive also. Notice we had a capital S, lowercase w. The new name, capital S, lowercase w. Keep that in mind as you work through. Next thing we're going to talk about is setting up some passwords. We do need to talk a little bit about some guidelines for setting up your passwords. First thing, don't use weak passwords. What we mean by a weak password is something easily guessed, something that is found in a dictionary. Those are easily guessed, easily used passwords, easily cracked. So a weak password is bad. Common passwords, don't use 1 2 3 4 5. Don't use ABCDEF. Don't use QWERTY. Those are all easily guessed passwords. Some guidelines here is it should be more than 8 characters. In today's world, you really need to have more than 8 characters in there. Computers, somebody who wants to try to get into your account, they can easily go through all the permutations of 5-6 characters fairly quickly, and they can compromise your accounts fairly quickly. The longer it is, the more it's going to take. Should have a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. Should have a combination of all those. Avoid using the same password. So for each account, you should have a different username and password. Up to about 5 years ago, I had like 3 or 4 passwords I used out on the internet. Now, because of how everything is working, websites being compromised, passwords being stolen all the time, I use a different password for every place I log into, every device I have. In case one gets compromised, they won't get access to any of the other devices I have or accounts. To configure our passwords on our Cisco devices, once again, a router or a switch, we go from privileged exec mode into global configuration, configure terminal or config T. Then we tell it what line we want to, because line is how we access our device. Here in this example, we're going to secure our console access. That was that blue cable that we plugged directly in, that out of band method to set that up. So we type in line console 0. We set the password as Cisco. So we've set that password as Cisco. Now on the next line, we type login. And what that does is it tells the VTY terminal to now use a password for logging in. Yes, it is possible to set the password, but not apply it to the login. So you need to set the password, so the password space Cisco, and then log in on the next command line. And what that did, once again, was say, okay, now anybody logging in at the console has to supply a password. Because if you don't set that password, I can walk up with a console cable to your device, connect in, and I have access to your entire network from there. After I typed in this example here, I typed the word N, and it takes me all the way out to privilege exec mode. It takes me from line configuration mode to global configuration mode, automatically down to privilege exec mode. In the second example here, what we're doing is setting the password to go from user exec mode to privilege exec mode. So when you type enable in user exec mode to get into privilege exec mode, this is the password it's going to do. So from privilege exec mode, you go into global configuration mode because that applies to the entire device. It's not necessarily just one interface, but it applies to the entire device. So we go into global configuration mode. You could type config T in there. Notice our command prompt changes, and then we start typing the command. The command here is enable, and then there's a space here. That space signifies that's the end of the command, and then we start the arguments. Here we said let's put our password in secret, meaning let's encrypt it. You could put the word password in there, and that would be in clear text, which you don't want to do. So you want to get used to putting in the word secret, and then it's the actual password. And yes, when you do type the password in here, it does show up in clear text as you enter it. But once you clear the screen, that's gone. Once you clear the history, you log out, log back in, you close your terminal emulation program, that password is gone then. At that point in time, nobody can go back to it. So I type in enable, I encrypt my password, I set the password, I type exit, takes me out of global configuration mode. Now every time I want to go from user exec mode to privilege exec mode, it will ask me for the password, and the password is class. Another password is, I talked about that in-band method, coming in through my virtual terminals. Go from privilege exec mode into global configuration mode, and then line, that's one of the way, line signifying we want to configure how we access these devices. So line, VTY, that's our virtual terminals, and then 0 to 15. 0 to 15 is up to 16 different devices could access your router, your switch remotely to do configurations. So you want to cover all your bases. Once again, I said 16, but remember we did 0 to 15. Sometimes in computers we start counting with 0. So the first one is 0, second one is 1, all the way up to 15. So that gives us the 16 ways to enter it. We set our password. We have to apply that password to the login then. And in this example, I typed N and it took us all the way out to privilege exec mode. That sets our password there for any time we want to log in through a terminal emulation mode. If you like this episode on device configuration and you get value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. Doing this supports the channel, which in turn helps me bring you more great content. Subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell. You can also visit my website at KevTechify.com for all of my details and how to get these episodes in video and podcast form. When we go through and set our passwords, if we didn't use secret earlier, that password would have been in clear text. So looking at the bottom left corner here, when we do a show running config and we see the configuration, see the settings in our device, it will say linecon 0 password, and then it will have the password in clear text if we would have put the password and not the word secret in there. If we forget to do that, or maybe during configuration we purposely put that password in clear text so that we can go in and we can configure it, when we're done, we can go back and we can encrypt those passwords. The command to do that from global configuration mode here is service is the command. And then what service are we doing? We're going to say password encryption. We are encrypting all of our passwords at this point in time. So now when we do a show running config, instead of being in clear text, it is a bunch of numbers and letters in there. I do want to warn you, this is not actually encryption. It's a hashing. And what the hashing is compared to encryption, hashing is using an algorithm to come up with a number. And basically it's a simplified version of encrypting. What you could do is take that password, that encrypted password down in the bottom left, take that, You could go online. There's tools out there to re-engineer, reconfigure out what your password is from a hash like that. And it will come back and it'll tell you, hey, your password was Cisco. Your password was class. Whatever you set your password is. So it's actually hashing it. It's not truly encrypting. So somebody could break into your system, get the hash, and doing that. What this stops is the person looking over your shoulder. If that password wasn't hashed like that, it would be in clear text. They could look there and see, and it said class, easily identifiable. Now when they look over your shoulder, they see a bunch of numbers and letters. That's not easily remembered at this point in time. So it helps from the people looking over your shoulder. If a hacker wanted to break in your system and got your hash, they could re-engineer it and then get into your system. The next thing is banner message of the day. What this is a message that pops up before somebody logs in. When you come up to your device, typically you have to hit enter and then it'll give you a prompt to log in. This is before you get into user exec mode. It pops up on your screen. So on the bottom left there, it said press return to get started. So you go up there, hit enter. It pops us up, authorized access only. This gives you a chance to put a message up there to the end user. Now, most of the time it should say something like authorized access only. A lot of times people will put in a lot bigger a lot bigger message of the day. You can put multiple lines in there, but what this message of the day is used for is to keep people out of your system. One of the first times somebody broke into Microsoft in Redmond, Washington, the gentleman hacked into the system. He was able to get into the computers. He looked around. He didn't do anything vicious, but then he stepped out. When they caught him and took him to court, the court let him off. And you know why? The message said, welcome to Microsoft. Needless to say, Microsoft in the next day or two, back in Windows 3.1.1, pre-2000, actually it's probably 1990s, early 1990s, Microsoft came out with a patch then that allowed you to change that message of the day, that banner message of the day. It then said, authorized access only. A lot of times companies run these by their lawyers to make sure that it covers what it needs to cover. There's some good examples out there online, what you can do if you don't exactly have lawyers to do. But in a bigger company, I'd run it by your lawyers, make sure it's sufficient, it covers what it needs to. Doing that, it's just to make sure that if somebody breaks into your system, that you can prosecute them at this point in time. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on basic device configuration. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on Introduction to Networks. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on Introduction to Networks. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.